Disclaimer: the limit of the sequence of Harry Potter is J.K. Rowling.
What is your qualification in defense, Professor?
Dolores Umbridge's sickly smile faltered for a moment at Hermione's words. With her newfound knowledge of how the school worked, Hermione's new line of attack was to try to fight Umbridge at her own game by using the rules against her. Hermione had no illusions that she'd win, but it should at least help expose the woman's fraud.
Are you questioning my teaching skills, Miss Granger?
Umbridge asked dangerously.
Not at all, ma'am. I didn't mean to imply anything. I just thought that, given your concern about the quality of our previous instructors, we could all be more assured if you were upfront about your own qualifications. I believe the minister's accreditation standards require all teachers to have at least an outstanding newt in their subject.
One more reason they couldn't get rid of Binns, too, unfortunately. Umbridge glared at Hermione, and she knew the woman was on to her.
I assure you that I am certified fully qualified to teach the new curriculum, she said curtly.
Hermione noted that she didn't just come out and say she had a sufficient newt score, and therefore she probably didn't. Not that it mattered with her theory-based curriculum. She decided to risk another play, however.
Who wrote the new curriculum anyway, Professor? Was it the Wizarding Examinations Authority? Why should that matter, Miss Granger?
Umbridge said, looking even sourer.
I was just curious, ma'am. It seems strange that the new defense curriculum removes the practical spellcasting component when the Charms and Transfiguration curricula, which were written by the WEA and have been praised for many years, direct that it should be a larger share of classwork.
Psst, Hermione, what are you doing? Ron hissed from behind her, but she ignored him.
You do not understand what you're talking about, Umbridge snapped. 5 points from Gryffindor for your continued interruption. A girl who co-opted her supposed greatest achievement from a respected scholarly family ought to be more careful with her words.
What? Several people gasped. Hermione's jaw dropped.
Excuse me, Professor. Are you referring to my work on Gamp's Law?
She said, struggling to maintain her smile.
Your work? Umbridge giggled inappropriately. I don't know who you think you're fooling, girl. A fourth-year Muggle-born girl with little formal training, a mediocre arithmancer who couldn't get a better job than teaching, and the pure-blooded daughter of the most famous spell-crafting family in Britain, who's been steeped in magical theory from an early age? I think we all know who did the real work on that paper.
Her wicked smile had returned. Several of the Ravenclaws in the class gasped softly to hear the insult at one of their favored professions.
That paper was a collaboration of... You are out of turn, Miss Granger. Another 5 points.
Hermione had to literally bite her tongue to force her retort down, and she clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. She heard Harry start to speak beside her, but she shot him a glare that said, "Don't you dare!" His detentions were finally done again, and she wasn't about to let him go for a third round, no matter what Umbridge said about her. Fortunately, though he was fuming, he held his tongue as well. But still, insulting her blood status, her favorite teacher, and her arithmancy skills all in one go, that one hurt. Hermione's birthday passed with little comment, and frankly, she was too focused on everything going on at school to care. Her sweet 16 didn't feel like that big a deal under present circumstances, although she did get a very nice kiss, or several, from George. Harry's general bad mood didn't improve much by Wednesday, and it didn't much surprise Hermione when Umbridge inspected their potions class that day.
"How does that woman find time to teach her own classes?"
she whispered to Parvati, but she didn't have an answer. Of course, being a Death Eater, Professor Snape wasn't one to be intimidated by the likes of Dolores Umbridge. But Umbridge's inspection gave Hermione another opportunity to needle her. At this point, some might have considered it foolhardy, but she had one more idea to try, and she was too stubborn to back down until she had exhausted all her jibes.
"Excuse me, Professor Umbridge,"
she said as Snape was grading the potions. Fortunately, Snape, for the moment, didn't interfere. Umbridge's nostrils flared at her, but she replied sweetly,
"Yes, can I help you, Miss Granger?" Since you're inspecting all the classes, if I had complaints against some of the teachers, would I be able to submit them to you somewhere?" "Complaints?" she said, taken back. "And just whom might you have complaints against?" "Oh, nothing specific at the moment, but I might want to bring some to you later on. Some of the older students and I compiled a list of them on the entire staff the year before last."
"Which were dealt with at the time," Snape interrupted, swooping over to them. Umbridge eyed the two of them, and Hermione could see she was putting two and two together. About half the class had stopped their exit to listen. Good.
"Of course, being away for a year, I wasn't sure what had been done to address them, Professor," Hermione said.
Umbridge eyed her curiously. Hermione knew she'd put the woman in a bind. Her dislike of Hermione set against her desire to dig up dirt on the staff.
"All of the teachers, Miss Granger?" "Yes, ma'am. We had concerns about the teaching at the school, just like the ministry did, and we wanted to be fair and thorough about it." "And what sort of complaints did you make?" "I wouldn't want to try to repeat such allegations purely from memory, but Professor McGonagall should still have the list if you're interested. Incidentally, Professor, while we're on the subject of evaluating teachers, if you're inspecting all the classes, who inspects you?"
Snape raised an eyebrow at Hermione. Umbridge looked offended.
"Excuse me, Hermione, are you insinuating that I am not qualified for my post again? I believe we already addressed this matter in class." "I know we did, ma'am. I just thought that if you'd wanted to truly appear fair and impartial to the public, if all of the teachers were being inspected, you should have the same assessment done, and it would be a conflict of interest to inspect yourself, wouldn't it?"
Umbridge's face went through what Hermione suspected was a flurry of emotions, mostly visible through twitches. This time, instead of trying to antagonize her outright, Hermione had tried to get under her skin by forcing her to agree with her logic. However, she quickly formulated a comeback.
"The ministry is personally seeing to the quality of my work, Miss Granger, so you need not worry on my account. Professor Snape, you will receive the results of your inspection within 2 weeks."
She walked out of the room with her nose in the air. Everyone else left the classroom, and Hermione sighed and turned to go. She had expected this, but it didn't make it any less disappointing. She could only hope that she'd set the rumor mill going. But before she could leave, Snape called out, "Granger!" Hermione stopped. The rest of the class had gone, except for Harry and Ron, who remained in the doorway. Snape shot them a sharp look and said, "Go on." They vanished from sight, although Hermione was sure they were listening just outside the door. Snape gave her a harsh stare and said, "Miss Granger, do you think it is easy serving two masters?"
"Either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other," she quoted.
"Very apt, but I know you know precisely why I asked that question," he said, continuing to glare at her. Hermione lowered her gaze a little and said,
"I'm sure it's very difficult, sir."
She was vaguely surprised he had recognized the Bible quote. "Yes, extremely," Snape said, "and my presence at this school is desired by both of them, as you can probably guess with that insufferable intellect of yours. If you do anything to jeopardize that arrangement, Miss Granger, the consequences will be as severe as it is within my power to make them, and my resources are substantial." Hermione shivered. She had definitely taken this a step too far.
"Yes, Professor, I understand, Professor,"
she said shakily, and she hightailed it out of the room as fast as she could.
"The nerve of that Snape!" Ron fumed at lunch. "Everyone knows he's the worst teacher in the school. You're just trying to help." "He ought to want Umbridge gone as much as we do," Ginny said.
She'd been equally furious when Harry and Ron told her.
"You know, if he's really on our side."
"What's all this about?" George said, sitting down beside her. Fred wedged himself in next to Ron, much to Ron's dismay.
"Snape threatened Hermione," Ron said.
"What?"
"Ron, it wasn't really like that, George," she pleaded with her boyfriend.
"He did say there would be severe consequences if you got him fired," Harry pointed out.
"Harry, you're not helping," she hissed. "I may have brought up the complaints I made against Professor Snape in our 3rd year with Umbridge," she said, picking at her food.
"And?" George said. Was she really that easy for him to read? She sighed.
In front of him.
Fred whistled loudly. "I think we've been a bad influence on her, George," he said. "That's gutsy even by our standards."
I didn't mention him by name, she protested. I just mentioned the complaints to Umbridge, and Snape said there would be severe consequences if I got him fired.
She heard George hiss.
And don't you do something stupid.
Are you sure? We could prank him, you know.
George, in 6 years, have you ever pulled one over on Snape?
Well, George and Fred said in unison.
No, right? I've been through enough with Harry. I don't need you two getting in trouble, too.
She is right, Fred, George admitted. Even with the map, Fred agreed. I swear it's like that man can read minds.
It doesn't matter anyway, Hermione said. I'm out of ways to try to deal with Umbridge to her face. We're not going to do more than chip away at her by using her own rules against her, and unfortunately we'll still have to live with Snape as long as Dumbledore needs him.
We've got to do something, though, Fred insisted. You can't let Umbridge walk all over you like that. She suspected he would have put his arm around her if it weren't for Umbridge's crusade against PDA.
You can be very sweet, George, when you want to be, she teased, but I can take care of myself. It's still no good, Ginny said. There's got to be some way to deal with her.
Well, Harry said hesitantly.
Yes,
she said. There's still Hermione's other idea.
What other idea?
George and Fred said together.
Not here,
Hermione whispered, sending a significant glance to the high table.
I'll explain it tonight.
Teach ourselves defense? The twins said with interest. The 6 of them had met in Harry and Ron's dorm room for more privacy, where Hermione told them her idea.
Well, technically I was just thinking me, Harry, Ron, and maybe Ginny, Hermione clarified.
Why not us? They replied at once.
I didn't mean to exclude you, it's just that you're 2 years ahead of us.
Yeah, but we've only had 2 decent teachers in 6 years, said Fred. And one of them was secretly an evil maniac, George added.
Yes, I suppose so. I wouldn't mind if you joined us myself, but I wanted to make sure we could be on the same page. And I also wasn't sure how Harry would feel about more people.
Everyone turned and looked at Harry. He didn't look happy to have all the eyes on him. What? He said.
Have you thought about the idea, Harry? Hermione asked.
He shrugged his shoulders. A bit. At first I thought it was completely mad, but then...
Then what?
Well, Ginny can be very persuasive. Ginny put one arm around him and grinned.
Ew, Ron said. We're right here, you know. Oh, shut up, Ron, she shot back.
It wasn't just that, though, Harry protested. I thought about it some more, and I couldn't help, planning a little. And then the way Umbridge went off on you, I wanted to do something. And Sirius and Remus thought it was a good idea.
They did?
Hermione said, unsure what to think. It was great that his guardian was standing by him, but Sirius wasn't the most responsible sort. On the other hand, Remus usually was.
Oi, they didn't tell Mum, did they?
Asked Fred. They didn't mention it, Harry said.
So you said you had some ideas, Hermione said.
Uh-huh. Remus said he could send me his upper-year course books and class notes from when he taught, and we could pick out the most practical parts since it's about actually defending ourselves and not passing exams. And I thought we could start by drilling basic stuff we know for sure we'll need, like disarming and stuff. That'll work even though we're in different years.
Disarming? Ron said. Seems a bit simple, don't you think?
It still helped me against Voldemort, and Hermione said she needed to work on her aim.
That's true, she said. And are you up for it with 6 of us?
I guess so. Not that much different from 4.
So how do we want to do this? George asked.
Hermione smiled at them.
I was thinking we should use the Room of Requirement. We'll need to keep this from Umbridge, of course. She definitely won't appreciate it. We have the maps to track her, though, so we can avoid her. Maybe Saturday night?
Harry still looked a little bit surly about the whole thing, but he sighed and said, Yeah, I guess we might as well. We need to do something this year. With their plans set, Hermione felt a little better. She felt more relaxed on Thursday and went down to the library early so she could sit in silence and consider the way forward while she waited for Daphne and Tracy to arrive. She still had an awful lot to do. She normally had little trouble keeping track of all of her various projects in her head, though she took copious written notes whenever it was applicable. She had a pretty good memory, after all. But between overlapping arithmancy projects at multiple levels of study, several things she wanted or needed to do to prepare for the coming conflict, and a few other fun things she wanted to work on, it was starting to get unwieldy. So when she looked over her sheaf of personal notes, Hermione decided she would do one of those big reorganizations she felt an itch to do every once in a while. Something to keep track of everything better. For starters, she put a new piece of parchment in front to list her projects. Should they be categorized? She soon decided they should, and two obvious categories presented themselves. She divided the parchment in half, and the left half she labeled War Effort, while the right half she labeled Academic Research. Then she looked at the page for a minute. No, that wouldn't do. If someone saw that written there, she'd be in trouble. She applied the same charm she'd got from the Marauder's map, and spent several minutes making the entire page look like indecipherable arithmancy notes to anyone who didn't have the password. Now for the actual lists. In the War Effort column, she wrote, Research Magical Weapons, Invent Curses, and Defense Practice. And after another moment's consideration, she added a bullet point under Defense Practice and wrote Left-handed Casting. Next came her academic research. She was being a bit loose with her definition here, it was true. That's what allowed her to write Magical Metallurgy alongside Real Analysis paper. Her main project, of course, was to put together a new scholarly paper from her real analysis studies that would contribute to her mastery. She wasn't quite sure where she was going with that, but she had a few ideas written down on the pages she'd already devoted to arithmancy. Fractal geometry, Fourier series, convergence of sequences of functions, that sort of thing. She also needed to be more careful now that she was getting into cutting-edge work that she didn't publish anything potentially useful to the enemy. It wasn't as confining as it sounded. Many particular formulae were non-obvious and would take someone extremely skilled to replicate even if she published the basic techniques. She started to write down Gamp's law, antimatter, but she stopped. Her ultimate project since she got deep into linear algebra last year was proving that it was impossible to transfigure antimatter. It was the worry that possibly it wasn't that had led her to study Gamp's law in the first place. But that project had needed months of hard work and a lot of help just to prove that it was impossible to transfigure radioactive isotopes. To tackle antimatter would take even more work to understand enough quantum mechanics to even start looking for a solution. And it wasn't like she was about to stumble on a way to do it by accident in the unlikely event it was possible, probably, so it really wasn't much of a priority. Thus, after some thought, she drew a third section at the bottom of the parchment and labeled it Long-Term Projects. Her other academic project, though it didn't exactly fit in anywhere, was the Mathemagician's Map. Her improved version of the Marauder's map was still unfinished, and she had a to-do list in her notes for that project. Adding areas of the castle that currently didn't show up, adding a user manual, making it automatically open to the floor you were on, adding a text interface, and then there was that business with the ghosts. Hermione had noticed that most of the ghosts in the castle showed up by their real names, rather than by their ubiquitous nicknames on both maps. Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, nearly headless Nick, Martin Beckett, the Fat Friar, Robin Greengrass, the Black Knight, Myrtle Warren, Moaning Myrtle, and so on. But there were two ghosts who did not show up as their real names. The Bloody Baron was named as Bloody Baron, and the Grey Lady was named as Grey Lady, and she couldn't account for that. Presumably, they were keyed into the wards that way, but how or why she couldn't guess. If she could find the time, perhaps she could go down and search the anchor stones for those names, since they presumably had to be carved into the rock somewhere. "Afternoon, Granger," a voice sounded. "Ah!" She snapped her notes shut worriedly before she realized what was happening. "Oh, it's you two. Hello, Greenglass Davis." "Working hard?" Greengrass asked, obviously angling for information. Right, just my, advanced arithmancy." "Really?" She quickly showed them her indecipherable cover page, and they bought her story at once.
"All right, so Porlocks?" Hermione asked as they sat down.
The two Slytherin girls spent the next half hour with her revising the characteristics of the odd horse guardians and their subtle relationships with centaurs, winged horses, nogtails, and mooncalves. They didn't correspond to any creature in Muggle folklore that Hermione had ever heard of, which surprised her, since few magical creatures were complete unknowns to the medieval bestiaries. But when she mentioned this, Greengrass only said,
"Well, you can't expect Muggles to get them all right,"
and moved on. Davis, she noticed, seemed a little tenser and more distant than usual today. Hermione didn't pry, but she got an answer for free when they switched subjects.
"So, anything you wanted to go over with arithmancy?" she asked.
Greengrass nodded noncommittally and took out her arithmancy notes, while Davis muttered something that Hermione couldn't make out, but Greengrass replied,
"Tracy, calm down. It's not that bad."
"Trouble?" Hermione ventured.
"Not with arithmancy, Granger," Greengrass said quickly.
"How are your defense marks?" Davis asked.
"Tracy!"
Greengrass hissed. Hermione could guess this was one of those things that they preferred to keep in Slytherin, but in response to her continued stares, Greengrass sighed and said,
"Tracy seems to be under the impression that she's going to flunk her owl." "And you're not, Daphne?" she said. "You have to sit through the same awful class I do. Honestly, all theory? No practical work?"
Davis was complaining as much to Hermione as to her friend now.
"And it's not like Umbridge will sit by if we try to do it on our own."
"I know," Hermione agreed. She colored a little when she thought of how she was sidestepping that rule.
"She isn't even trying. I thought I'd seen some bad teachers before, but Umbridge takes the cake." "Yeah, but that's politics," Greengrass said. "You can always practice at home over the holidays, Tracy." "Maybe you can, Daphne. You know how uptight my mom is about the underage magic thing. So come to my place. Better wards anyway."
Hermione's eyebrows shot up. She'd almost missed it, but why would they care about the strength of her house's wards? Did they actually know something? With as connected as Greengrass's family was, she probably had plenty of inside information. And as for why they would care, well, Davis was a half-blood, and they weren't in with the popular crowd in Slytherin. But that was all conjecture, and Hermione didn't think it would be civil to press the issue. On the other hand, getting a read on Slytherin in general could be valuable.
"So, no love for Umbridge and Slytherin either?" she asked. "Well, I can't speak for Malfoy's crowd," Greengrass said. "They look like they get on swimmingly with her."
Hermione had another brainwave, and decided to take a chance with a minor bit of her own inside information.
"Well, if you believe the rumor about her being here to get rid of Dumbledore, then they want the same thing, don't they?"
Greengrass and Davis both regarded her with interest. Hermione hoped she was learning to navigate these circles properly. Of course, she had no doubt that they knew her drop of information was deliberate.
"So that's what they're saying in Gryffindor?" Greengrass asked.
Hermione saw the ploy coming easily and answered,
"That's what they're saying a lot of places. Why? Isn't that what they're saying in Slytherin? I would have thought it was obvious if you read the Prophet." "Oh, it's obvious enough," she said idly. She paused and thought for a moment. "Good to see you know what's what around here." "Actually, Malfoy's been bragging about it in the common room," Davis said. "Davis? What? Whatever happened to subtlety?" "Well, it's not like Malfoy ever had any," Hermione jumped in, and Davis snorted. "Malfoy's a prat. There, I said it," Greengrass snapped. "But don't you underestimate him." She looked back at her best friend. "Either of you." Saturday promised to be a busy day. Tonight would be the first meeting of their secret little defense study group, and Hermione felt oddly eager. It felt exciting breaking the rules. Okay, so it wasn't technically against the rules. Yet. And she'd broken more than her share of rules before. But against Umbridge, it felt like she had a real cause this time. She was becoming quite the little rebel, wasn't she? She blamed George. Harry, however, was not looking eager.
In fact, he looked listless and had dark circles around his eyes, despite having the opportunity for a lie-in. She of course asked him if he was all right as they went down to breakfast. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well," he mumbled.
"Bad dreams?"
Ginny asked. He nodded.
"Do you want to talk about it?"
Harry opened his mouth and looked about to brush her off, but he thought better of it and said softly, "It's weird. It's not like it's even that bad, but I always wake up in a cold sweat afterwards."
"You've had it before?" Hermione asked.
Uh-huh. I've been having the same dream since around the Dementor attack. I'm walking down this dark corridor and I'm trying to get to this big locked door. I know I need to get through it. It's really important that I get through it, but I never can. I always wake up first." "That's all?" Ron said. "I didn't say it made sense," he snapped. "It still keeps me up at night, and no, I don't know why. It just does."
"It's okay, Harry," Hermione tried to assure him. "Just try to take it easy tonight, all right?"
She lowered her voice to a whisper.
"At least you'll get a chance to fire off some hexes tonight, right?"
"Yeah, I guess there's that."
"So, instead of a sequence of numbers as a function, this is a sequence of functions?" Septima asked. "That's right," Hermione said. "It's pretty simple, defined in nearly the same way. The sequence might be as simple as function number n of x equals n times x. And the sequence might converge, or it might not. And if you take the sum of the sequence, you get a series, and you've already done some work with those, power series and Fourier series. But that would imply that many spells that are constructed as truncations of power series are actually part of an infinite family of spells that correspond to different elements in the sequence." "Yes, now you're getting it," Hermione said happily. "But that's not really that radical, is it? I mean, everyone knows you can truncate the power series wherever you want." "Yes, but they don't normally construct all of the possible spells as a family. And if you could find patterns going down the power series, maybe you could find higher order spells that are degenerate in some way that you could actually cast them." She bit her lip and thought. "I suppose it's possible. I'm more interested in things like the Weierstrass function that don't have the nice smooth behavior of the functions that usually go into spells. I mean, who knows what new applications that could open up?" "That's a very speculative project, though," Septimus suggested. "I know you want to continue these studies, but something a little more concrete like our work on Gamp's law would be better for your masterwork." "Well, I'm still looking at different projects, of course, but if I'm going to take 2 or 3 years on this, I have time to explore a little."
Actually, her antimatter proof might work nicely as a 2 or 3 year project, but since most wizards didn't even know what antimatter was, that might not be the best choice either. Septima sighed.
2 or 3 years. I know, things don't look so certain at the moment," Hermione said with a frown. "I don't know that I'd worry too much about you, though. You're a pure blood and a former Slytherin. Not that there's anything wrong with that." "Hermione, don't you remember your first year here? I defied you-know-who to his face. Well, to Quirrell's face, but... Oh, Merlin, I still can't believe I did that." "Oh, no, I'm sorry, Septima, I hadn't thought of that. But you know you have allies here. Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall will back you if it comes to it, and I'm sure there are others. Hagrid when he comes back." "Whatever happened to Hagrid, anyway?" Septima said, suddenly changing the subject. "Where did he go?" "I don't know for sure, but Oops, she caught herself a little too late. Why do you think I knew something?" "You hear rumors on the staff here, too, Hermione. I don't know much about your summer, but I know you had contact with Professors Dumbledore and McGonagall." "Oh, well, the Giants, I think," she whispered. "Giants? Why would we want to deal with those brutes?"
Hermione was taken aback. Sometimes she could forget about the other prejudices that were far more prevalent amongst wizards than the ones about blood status.
"Well, I don't know if they're brutes," she bristled, "but it's better than having Voldemort court them unopposed, isn't it?"
Septima still flinched at the name.
"I suppose when you put it that way," she admitted, rubbing her forehead. "It's never easy, is it? My apologies. I shouldn't be laying my worries on you." "It's all right. I think there's plenty to go around." She took a sip of tea. "I really worry about Georgina. She's only 12, and she doesn't deserve what's coming. She barely even knows, And the worst part is, she's not learning to defend herself. Umbridge's class is worse than useless. I try to help her on the side, but even I have to do it in secret. There's only so much I can do." "I know how you feel," Hermione agreed. "Trying to get myself and my friends some semblance of prepared. Well, it's hard," she finished, not trusting herself to say more. The plight of Georgina and the other younger students gave her pause, though. If it was bad for the upper years, who'd had decent teachers the last 2 years, it would be even worse for the first and second years. She'd have to think about it. At 8 o'clock that night, Hermione paced slowly back and forth past the blank wall that concealed the room of requirement. She'd offered Harry the option of setting the room, but he deferred on the grounds that it was her idea. She thought a little more carefully about how she wanted the room arranged this time. "We need a place to learn defense," she thought. "We need a place to learn defense. We need a place to teach ourselves properly." An ornate door appeared in the wall, and the 6 of them filed inside. The room was big for a group of 6, but that was because it had several sections to it. There was a reading corner with shelves full of defense textbooks and lost library books from generations of former students. Probably some from before Voldemort cursed the job. She added the books Remus had sent to them. There were large cushions for seats and for learning the stunning spell. Another set of shelves held artifacts delivered up by the room like sneakoscopes and probity probes. Interesting that they'd be included. Hermione hadn't thought of them, but perhaps the room thought that they were part of teaching themselves properly. At the far end of the room were some more of the paper targets Hermione had destroyed before, but now enchanted to move around on stands, and, while still man-shaped, they were now marked with the Death Eater's skull masks. Fred and George both whistled when they saw the room, and Ron and Ginny looked around in awe. Harry appeared pleasantly surprised by her mental handiwork, and he scanned the room appreciatively. "A shooting gallery?" he asked, pointing at the targets. "Yes, I thought if it works for police, well, American police mostly, it could be useful. I know I need to work on my aim, and this will help us hit things that are Death Eater-sized, you know?" Harry chuckled a little. "The mask's a nice touch," he said. "This is bloody brilliant!" Ron exclaimed. "I'll say," Ginny agreed. "This will be great. Lots of room to practice spells, and no one to stop us." "And here I thought this room was only good for snogging," George quipped. "George!" Hermione started, but he cut her off with a kiss. Fred Wolf whistled, but he ignored him. "So, my brilliant girlfriend, where do we start?" "Well, I think the planning is more Harry's department." All eyes turned to Harry. He looked dazed for a moment, then glared at her briefly, but he went ahead anyway. So I guess the first thing is to practice the disarming charm like I said before. Do it enough that we can get the wand movements right and fast every time, and so we can actually hit each other with it. What do you think?" "Sounds good to me," Ron said with a grin. "Should we use the targets or just hex each other?" "Expelliarmus!" Ginny cried, and a bolt of red light flew at Ron's face. His wand went spinning into her hand. "Oi!" he yelled. "Wow, that's really good aim, Ginny," Hermione complimented her. "You don't make reserve chaser if you don't have good aim," she grinned. "Not to mention her bat bogey hexes," Fred pointed out. "All right then, let's pair up," Harry said. 3 pairs of duelists soon formed. Ginny faced off against Ron, Fred against George, and Hermione found herself facing Harry. "Well, this seems familiar," she said, remembering her duels with him last year. "Uh-huh," Harry said. "Back up a few paces." "Huh?" "I know we can hit each other at this distance. Voldemort and I were farther apart when—" "Oh, right," Hermione said, blushing a little. She took a few steps back. "Come to think of it, you and Malfoy were this far apart at Lockhart's dueling club in second year, too. I guess 10 paces should be standard, maybe even 20. "On 3?" he asked. She nodded. "Okay, 1, 2, 3. "Expelliarmus!" they both yelled. Hermione's spell whizzed by Harry's right ear. Harry's caught her in the left arm, which set her spinning as it tried to pull her second wand out of her sleeve. They all took it in turns from there, switching partners every few spells. They were pleased to see that everyone in their little group could at least cast the spell reliably. Harry and Ginny definitely had the best aim,
but between Hermione consulting the books and Harry drawing on his experience, they were all able to make little adjustments to their wand movements to improve, and all of them could soon pretty reliably hit each other at 10 paces. "All right, this is good," Harry said after a while. Hermione could see he was starting to loosen up and get into the role. "But remember, in a real fight, your opponent won't be standing still directly opposite you. So, let's try it again, but this time, actually try not to get hit. Dodge, dive for cover, even run around the room if you want. There's no rules in a real fight, you know." "This could get messy," Fred said. "I like it," George replied. It did get messy. Even with only 6 of them, it was chaos. They started running around, casting from behind cover, and Fred and George even tried to use Ron and Harry as human shields. Ginny pinned down Hermione behind a bookcase and tried to shoot all the books off the shelves to get a clear shot at her, scattering them all over the floor, something Hermione was not happy about. Before long, they lost track of whom they were supposed to be disarming, and it turned into a free-for-all. "Okay, stop, stop, stop!" Hermione yelled. The spells stopped flying, and she and Harry exchanged an understanding look. "Okay, I think that might have been a little too complicated," he admitted. "We should probably have tried just dodging first, or something like that."
"We should try different spells before long, too," Hermione suggested. "The different wand motions might affect the aiming."
"Good idea. Let's try something more like the dueling we did last year. We can use simple jinxes and stuff, and we can dodge, but we have to stay in the same general area." "Works for us," the twins said.
"Me 3,"
Ginny said.
"All right then,"
Ron said.
"Flipendo."
Ginny, caught by surprise, was knocked off her feet.
"Hey!"
she yelled. "Don't get any warning in a real fight, do you?"
"Oh, it's on!"
Another round of dueling, and some discussion afterwards, and they had a better idea of how to move forward. There were too many spells to do all of them in depth, but they would definitely need to practice a few different ones to get good at this. By then, it was getting close to curfew, so they checked the maps and slipped back to the common room.
"And this is why you need a practical component,"
Hermione concluded when they were done. "Yes, well, not like Umbridge cares," Harry said darkly. "She doesn't want us to be able to fight."
"So she's an idiot, then," said Ginny. "Even without you-know-who, there's criminals and stuff." "No, not an idiot," Hermione corrected. "She knows exactly what she's doing. She just doesn't care. It's all politics."
"Bloody politics," Ron grumbled. "Bloody politics," Fred and George agreed.
"I thought you made a pretty good teacher, Harry."
Hermione tried to lighten the mood. Harry looked like he wanted to be annoyed, but she could tell he had enjoyed himself back there. Still, he said, "You did as much as I did, though."
"Maybe, but I think you're more of a natural leader. I can organize and coordinate, but you're the one who really took charge by the end."
Harry just shrugged his shoulders.
"This was fun,"
Ron said brightly.
"Same time next week, then?" "Works for me,"
Hermione said. And that would have been that, except things never quite went so smoothly at Hogwarts. It was only 2 days before Harry came to Hermione with a sheepish look on his face. Hermione immediately got a bad feeling about it.
"Harry, what's wrong?" she said. "You didn't get more detention, did you?"
"No. Why is that the first thing you thought of?"
"Sorry."
"Look, I don't really think it's that big a deal, but we might have a bit of a problem," he said.
"What is it?"
"Well, Ron and I might have mentioned our defense study group in front of the other guys in our dorm." Hermione smacked her forehead.
"Harry! What happened to being discreet?"
"I'm sorry. Ron brought it up, and we tried to throw them off, but they wouldn't let it go, so we had to explain. And didn't tell them when or where we were having it, but—"
"They didn't tell, did they?"
"No. Ron told Seamus to keep his mouth shut or else, but—"
"Harry?"
she asked with a hint of warning. "Neville and Dean asked if they could join us." Doubtless to Harry's surprise, Hermione grew calmer upon hearing that.
"Well," she said cautiously, "I've been thinking, we are talking about protecting ourselves from Voldemort. It'd only be fair if we offered to teach other people who want to learn it."
Harry's eyebrows shot up. "Are you serious? It's one thing with us. We were all at headquarters and stuff. We know what we're up against. None of them do."
But the exercises we did on Saturday would work for most everyone, wouldn't they? I didn't mean right away anyway. I'd thought about it, but I was concerned about keeping it under wraps, and I wanted us to get settled in and know what we were doing before we worked out how to bring in more people.
Well, if it's not too many, Harry conceded. Not like many people want to learn from a nutter like me, although if you're a teacher too...
I think you might be surprised either way, but we can cross that bridge when we come to it.
So what do we do about Neville and Dean?
Ask George, Fred, and Ginny if they're all right with it, and then invite them to come Saturday night. And in the meantime, tell everybody not to tell anyone else.
Got it. But if Hermione thought that would be the end of it, she would be sorely disappointed, as one of her own roommates approached her that night.
Hermione, could I talk to you for a minute?
Sally Ann said in a small voice. She looked nervous. Hermione hadn't spoken with her much since that first night when she'd cautiously backed Harry. She looked more fearful now, with a worn-down look in her eyes that hadn't been there before.
Of course, Sally Ann,
Hermione said with concern.
How are you doing? I've been getting by, she said. I just wanted to ask you, I heard that you're organizing a secret defense practice, she blurted. Oh, Hermione groaned. Where did you hear that?
Sally Ann flinched.
From Dean, she said. Dean? Yeah, I've been talking to him more this year. He's Muggle-born. Well, he thinks his dad was a wizard, but... Okay, I get it. You haven't told anyone else, have you? No, I just wanted to ask if I could join you.
Hermione suppressed another groan.
Any particular reason? She asked. Hermione, we're both Muggle-born. You know we need to protect ourselves the way things are. I wanted to talk to you before, really. I wanted to learn, and Umbridge never teaches us anything. And Lily's still being a stubborn bitch, and you're always so busy. Sally Ann, please. Hermione hugged her.
She could feel the tension in her muscles. She could recognize it from all the times she'd hugged Harry. Her roommate was really having a hard time of it.
Sorry, she whispered. It's all right. We're under a lot of stress right now. I know how you're feeling. I think I've been feeling it longer than you have, honestly. Look, just don't tell anyone else, okay? I'll talk to the rest of our group, and if they don't mind, I'll tell you where to meet us. Oh, thank you, Hermione, Sally Ann squealed. She squeezed her back uncomfortably tight and kissed her on the cheek. For her part, Hermione was pleased she could help another friend, but she really hoped this wouldn't get out of hand. Ginny, please tell me you didn't tell anyone about our you-know-what practice.
Hermione was agitated again by breakfast the next morning, and it didn't help that Ginny suddenly looked very uncomfortable.
Oh, come on!
She yelled a little too loudly.
I only told Luna, Hermione, and I told her to keep it a secret. I trust her. I'm her best friend, though, and it just sort of slipped out. Of course it did. Did she seem interested? She did kind of ask if she could join in, Ginny said.
Hermione rolled her eyes.
Well, she's a Ravenclaw, and she actually believes Harry about you-know-who. It couldn't hurt, could it?
Her too? Harry said uncomfortably. Ginny gave him a quizzical look. Neville and Dean asked us to join yesterday, he said.
And Sally Ann asked me last night, Hermione added. Dean told her.
Harry and Ron colored.
Sorry about that, Ron said. Well, what's done is done. George, Fred, did you tell anyone? She asked, afraid of the answer.
But Fred answered proudly. Nope, no one. He shot Ron a smug look. Fred wanted to tell Lee, but I said we should ask you first, George said. Whipped, Fred grumbled. Jealous, his twin replied.
Anyway, Hermione cut in before an argument could start, I was thinking we could bring in more people, maybe even should, but we need to slow down and figure out how to make sure Umbridge doesn't hear about it.
Also, we don't want to be teaching half the school, Harry pointed out.
I'd mostly be concerned about the secrecy, but I agree it would be a bit much. But before we even get that far, I wanted to ask you if you were all okay with bringing in more people. We're all in this together, aren't we?
The other 5 all stopped and thought, though the twins didn't have to think very long. Works for us, Fred said. Yeah, I wanted to ask you first, but we thought Lee and the girls might be interested, George added.
And which girls are these, George?
Hermione said with exaggerated suspicion. George said. Fred sniggered at him. Oh, shut it, Fred. I meant from the Quidditch team. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie.
All right, then. Ginny? I don't have many different friends apart from you to ask. Maybe Colin and Dennis? But I don't mind. It might be fun. Ron?
Might as well. Say, do you think Parvati would want to do it? Hermione rolled her eyes. Ron was still trying to chase after her roommate off and on, but she really thought they'd be better off as just friends.
Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves,
she said. Merlin's beard. They'd be up to 17 already.
Neville, Dean, Sally Ann, and Luna. We'll invite the 4 of them this Saturday, but don't tell anybody else until we meet and discuss it then. Agreed?
Agreed.